Very much. Well, thank you very much. I'm happy to be here. It sounds like everyone can hear me, and I have a very short PowerPoint that I'm going to pull up as well. Yes, and we can just double check that it works. Yes, okay. I wanted to talk about just a couple things today. One is a former Shoreline student who transferred to the University of Washington who, as the president mentioned, is currently detained at the Northwest Detention Center down in Tacoma. And I wanted to take maybe 15 minutes to talk a little bit about his case and how it reflects different parts of immigration policy and different lessons that I see as an immigration lawyer working with people. And then I want to go on and talk a little bit about different forms of relief that people have or may have, a little bit of an update to DACA and where we currently are, as it seems to change week by week, and it certainly will be changing in the upcoming weeks, as well as a few forms of immigration relief that people might not be aware of that really I like to take the opportunity to publicize just because immigration law is complex. It's very arbitrary, so it doesn't necessarily make sense in a really logical way because it's just a creation of Congress. It's just kind of what the laws are that are passed. It's not really a kind of equitable, weighing of positive and negatives necessarily. So for that reason, it often seems to not make very much sense, I think, from the outside. So with that in mind, I want to talk about Bengali, and Bengali Fati is somebody who some of you may have known, certainly professors, both in Shoreline and the University of Washington, really have described him as a kind of beloved student. When I think about if I were to have kind of disappeared when I was in undergraduate, I'm not sure that many professors really would have noticed or would be writing letters of support for me, or it would have really caused much of an impact. But I've been really moved by just seeing all of the people who've come out in support of this former classmate as he's been dealing with his immigration issues. So I put these pictures up because, this is the sort of sympathetic side and the very human side. Bengali is somebody who came to Shoreline as an older student, and he is originally from the Gambia and is a citizen of the Gambia. And in the last few years got married. His wife is up there with him, and they recently had a baby who's about 6 months old now, I believe. This is sort of the human side of the story, but there's the kind of immigration side too. So when Bengali came to the US, he originally came wanting to go to school, and the funding fell through for him. And so he was kind of scrambling to find a job and think about how he might be able to go back to school. At one point, he was actually, we would call it nowadays, trafficked for his labor. So he wasn't paid correctly. He was kind of held in a almost involuntary servitude kind of situation before he managed to get out of it. And, really had a rough time for quite a few years, struggled with homelessness, picked up a number of criminal convictions as well. And so he was eventually placed into immigration proceedings. He had a number of different arguments he made, but the judge didn't rule in his favor, and he was ordered deported and had a final order of removal to take him back to the Gambia. But as you might have heard, there are various countries which have a practice of not accepting people for return. That is, they simply don't issue travel documents to allow the person to be sent back. Somalia, for a long time, which didn't even have a government to issue travel documents, would be an example. You probably heard about, you may have heard about people from Iraq who their country was not accepting them. Indonesia, a number of different countries around the world. In the current administration, there's been a real press, although this was happened under Obama as well, to pressure different countries to start accepting their people back. That is, they would threaten to take away visitor visas, issuing visas to various foreign ministers who would be coming to the country to really try and force their hand. And that's really what happened in Bengali's case. So he was released on what was called an order of supervision and had a work permit and was able to live a pretty normal life, working, kind of turned his life around, went back to school, did really well in school, was an honors student for a number of years on this order of supervision with sort of the vague threat that maybe someday his country might take him back hanging over his head. And in a lot of cases, this is something that can happen for years, decades even. Somalia hadn't really had a government since 1991. So you had people from Somalia who'd been ordered deported 15, 16 years ago, who all of a sudden their government is now starting to take them back. And so basically what happened was the government of Gambia issued a travel document for him, and ICE came to his house and picked him up one day and brought him to the detention center. And, I put these photos up for the human side, but one of the big issues, I think, now in kind of talking about immigration issues and framing them is, and this comes up really a lot in the DACA context, is kind of putting the model immigrant against the criminal immigrant or the wrongdoer. And so a lot of the messaging around immigration these days is, oh, well, look, this person doesn't deserve to be deported. This person is doing everything right. This person isn't one of those bad immigrants who we're focusing on. And so when you see the immigration debate, there's a lot of focus on deporting criminal aliens, right? And so in Mr. Fati's case, ICE looks at him as a criminal alien. And I kind of feel like that's period. So it's really hard to get the message of a successful student, somebody who's turned their life around, who's built a life in the US, past that criminal alien context. And I think DACA advocates have really been at the forefront of that issue of saying, no, we don't want to frame ourselves who are innocents, who are simply brought here with no agency, versus our parents who did something bad by breaking the law. We want to look at the human side of all of us are human and all of us deserve respect, and let's look at the whole picture. And so that is one issue that Bengali's case really brings up in the immigration context. The other one that we're dealing with, and that is a local and a national issue, is detention. So I just threw up a couple slides here. I don't know if everybody knows, but we have one of the largest detention centers in the country very close by in Tacoma. It's called the Northwest Detention Center. It has over 1,500 beds. It's a regional detention center. So people who are picked up by ICE in Oregon, Alaska, around the region are shipped there and held, waiting for their hearings or waiting to be removed. There's a picture from the Northwest Detention Center inside. It reminds me of a medium security prison. I've been in a number of different prisons and worked with people in a number of different prisons, and so that's kind of what it feels like to me. It is run by a private company, and so this is one of those issues that is definitely in the news and definitely at the forefront, called the GEO Group, and a publicly traded company. I was just kind of curious as I was thinking about talking about this, wonder how the stock prices are on that particular company, and I thought it was fascinating that you can see how the stock prices react to different public events. So in around mid to late 2016, in the Obama administration, the Office of the Inspector General, I believe it was, issued a report saying, the federal contracting of private companies to run prisons is not working. They're generally more violent, and there are more disciplinary issues and more staffing issues there than in federally run facilities, so we think we should phase them out. And that was in the prison context, but it was also extrapolated to the immigration detention context because it's federal. And you can see the GEO stock price fell, precipitously is not an exaggeration on that, right around that time. Around November of 2017, with the election, it also rose up almost just as precipitously. So very much reflecting current events. If you play it forward, it's interesting to see the stock prices rising and falling based on some of the executive actions and the travel ban rulings and notices coming out. What did I want to say about that? So other things that you're hearing about the Northwest Detention Center in the news, or if you haven't heard about them, they are fascinating, really local developments. There is wage and hour litigation going on against the Northwest Detention Center. Detainees there work for $1 a day. There is an interesting question about how much that is voluntary and whether that's ever coerced. So there are instances of people who organize against working or may protest about working, being sent to segregation or isolation. This is being, but the underlying issue is whether or not a private detention center is required to meet minimum wage requirements. So prisons are not under Washington law. So the narrow legal question is this a prison or is it not a prison under Washington state law? The plaintiffs in this case, both the Attorney General and a private law firm, have suits going, and they have survived a preliminary motion to dismiss in the private lawsuit. There's also a lawsuit on this issue in Denver because there's a detention center there. So that's the local issue that's going on that's reflected in the case. Now, a lot of detainees want to be able to work. You want to pass the time there. The real question is whether or not they should be paid minimum wage. As I understand it, GEO is represented in court that if they were forced to pay minimum wage, their business model would not work. So they would not be able to really make a profit. The other kind of ripped from the headlines issue that is also reflected in Bengali's case is that, and I'll just mention this as an aside, is that ICE did confirm all of his addresses and his most recent addresses through Department of Licensing information from Washington State Department of Licensing. So you may have also been reading about the fact that the Department of Licensing was sharing that information with immigration, and that's precisely what happened in his case. So Bengali, while he was out of detention, working and going to school, he was exploring if he had other immigration options, like what he could do. And the answer that he got from the attorneys that he talked with was because of some of his criminal convictions in the past, he wasn't going to be able to get immigration status, even if he did marry a U.S. citizen. I'm currently at the University of Washington Immigration Law Clinic, which is a class where students learn how to do immigration law. We're not really an immigration legal services nonprofit. We take on a couple different cases that are usually referred from the Northwest Immigrant Rights Project, which is a large immigrant rights group and legal services group that helps people who otherwise couldn't afford to hire a private attorney. But some of his professors actually reached out to the clinic to ask if we could meet with him just to see if there was anything he might be eligible for. And sitting down with him, we asked him really for the first time if he'd ever been trafficked. So if he'd ever worked for somebody, not been paid his wages, been threatened that if he complained about being paid the wages that were due to him, that he would be reported to immigration. Did they ever take your passport, hold on to your passport, otherwise keep you isolated, etc. And nobody had asked him that question before, and it turned out he had been. And I have some further slides that I'm going to talk about. This is one of the forms of relief that people don't necessarily know about. And so there is actually a status for people who have been trafficked and are willing to and able to provide information to law enforcement about their trafficking. It's called a T visa. So we identified that he was eligible for a T or a trafficking visa, and he and his wife decided they wanted to try and apply for it because it seemed like something that might actually work out. And his criminal convictions would not be a bar to the trafficking visa. He could get a waiver for them. And so that's where we currently are. We went to ICE and said, hey, would you consider not deporting him? Would you stay his removal while we file this T visa? And ICE would not do that, and so we had to file something in federal district court asking the federal judge to stay his removal while immigration was considering his T visa. And that's currently being litigated right now. And so we've turned in an initial round of briefing. A magistrate judge will issue a recommendation, then we'll have our objections, and then it will go to the federal judge for an ultimate decision in the case. And to me, this really underscores another issue which is very difficult in immigration cases, which is you have a right to hire your own attorney, but you do not have a right to an appointed attorney. So everybody's familiar with criminal defense, that if you're facing more than 6 months of potential custody, jail time, a lawyer will be appointed for you if you can't afford one. In immigration, you have to represent yourself if you can't get a lawyer. And so in this case, if you were to add up attorney's fees, if you were a private attorney, and just what we've done now, it would easily be $10,000, $15,000 worth of attorney time at a minimum. So really prohibitively expensive for most people to try and engage in this kind of litigation or challenging their case. We're seeing some movement, some push on how far this you have to represent yourself goes. And this is also, I'd say, local news. This is really driven by the Northwest Immigrant Rights Project in partnership with other people, litigation challenging, for example, people who are not competent, who have mental health issues. You're schizophrenic. You cannot tell reality from fantasy. You are not able to accurately gauge what is the truth and what is not the truth. Historically, you're representing yourself, which is crazy. It really is, I shouldn't say crazy in that context, but it really is astounding. And there was litigation from stemming out of California that NERP was involved in, which said, listen, if you're detained and you are not competent to represent yourself, not competent to understand what's going on in proceedings, to assist in your own defense, then a lawyer has to be appointed. And that was really the first crack in civil cases for appointment of counsel. More recently, the challenge that was raised was for children. Parents and children will appear at the border. Not uncommon for 14-year-old, 13-year-olds coming from Central America, fleeing violent situations in Central America, to cross through Mexico by themselves. Some amazing documentaries on that. So you would have 14-year-olds, 15-year-olds appearing at the border saying, hey, I can't go back, I need to seek asylum. You be representing yourself. We have maybe a 3-year-old comes with an aunt, and the 3-year-old is in proceedings, and technically the 3-year-old is representing themselves, right? So the judges are looking for somebody to speak on their behalf, but they still have no lawyer appointed for them. So that was an issue that was being litigated here in the Western District of Washington, so in a district court in Seattle, which initially issued favorable rulings, but the Ninth Circuit said, we want to take this on a case-by-case basis, so we want to see you litigate up one of these cases. So an example of a 3-year-old or a 5-year-old who didn't have a lawyer, and let's see how the whole process went. So that's still being fought right now. And to me, it's really tricky, because if you're in the nonprofit sector, you're usually saying, I'm sorry, or often saying, I'm sorry, I can't take your case. There's just so many cases we have, and we have to do a good job on our cases. We can't take your case on. If you're in the private sector and you're charging, then you're in the position of saying, I'm sorry, I need to get paid and pay the expenses of the office, and this is what it's going to cost in order to take the case. And so, I feel we're really fortunate to have been able to step in to Bengali's case, but it certainly has consumed our immigration law clinic, and so we would normally be taking on probably cases from people who are detained in Tacoma, maybe 1 or 2 of those cases, and we're simply not able to do that. So we have to make those tough calls about who we're working with. So those are kind of the points I wanted to make about general immigration practice and immigration law, just kind of through the lens of the student. And I've been asked to keep it a little short just so that there's an opportunity for questions, because there's so much to talk about around immigration issues. So the other things that I wanted to bring up are some DACA updates and these other forms of relief that people aren't usually as aware of. So DACA in 2 minutes or less. So everybody's been reading about DACA in the headlines, and the short story is, of course, that the Trump administration announced that it was phasing out DACA, eliminating DACA. That was on September 5th. It would end on March 5th. It's kind of thrown to Congress to, well, maybe Congress will come up with a fix on this. And of course, the latest government shutdown brought this issue to the forefront as well. Meanwhile, while we're waiting for a fix, and who knows if it will happen, on January 9th, a district court judge in California found that the phasing out of DACA was not, without getting into the merits of the decision, basically held that that would not be lawful. And so there was a preliminary ruling that DACA would continue. So what that means and that is being appealed. And from what I understand, it looks like the Supreme Court has indicated that it will accept a direct appeal from the district court. So this will go up to the Supreme Court without a doubt. What that means right now is we're in a very unusual place where USCIS, immigration, has started accepting DACA renewals again. So I don't think very few people in the advocacy world really thought that this would happen and that immigration would start accepting renewals. Yes? Yes, so if your DACA expired on or after September 5th of 2016, then you can file a renewal now. Yes. However, so people can file renewals for if their DACA expired on or after that date of September 5th, 2016. If you had DACA, but it expired before September 5th, 2016, or was terminated, then right now you can file a new initial application. People who never filed for DACA are currently not able to file. So if you never previously applied, you wouldn't be able to file a new DACA application now. The big question, of course, is, do you apply or not? Do you renew it? What's going to happen for those renewals? Of course, the answer is it's completely unpredictable. I will say when the DAPA litigation was going on, so that was the expansion of DACA that made it up to the Supreme Court, almost all advocates thought that, well, there's no way the courts are going to find that DAPA is unlawful. That is clearly just prosecutorial discretion from the agency, really no legal doubt that that is perfectly reasonable to do and perfectly within the executive's authority. And the Fifth Circuit went the other way, so the courts of appeals in that part of the country went the other way, and the Supreme Court also split on the issue 4-4. And you had a lot of immigration professors really having to re-examine their opinions on that. Very surprising. And really a minority of immigration scholars who thought that would happen. So most people looking at the issue now, I would say think, yeah, DACA is not going to be, the courts are not going to continue DACA. But we've all been wrong before. So it is very unpredictable as to what is actually going to happen. Right now, I think that the short answer is always, talk to an attorney, go to a DACA renewal clinic. We have some materials with listing both contact information for the Northwest Immigrant Rights Project, which is doing DACA workshops, as well as private attorneys on the table over there. And really talking one-to-one about your individual circumstance with somebody is the right thing to do. This is not a great place to talk about that and talk about individual cases, obviously. But the big picture is that if you are eligible to renew, you might be out the renewal money. But otherwise, it certainly might make sense to go ahead and file that renewal application. But very unpredictable whether or not it'd just be throwing that money away or not. There are also organizations which are helping with the filing fees, and those are listed on the Northwest Immigrant Rights Project website. So at any of you who are involved in this big push back in October to do renewals, you might have been aware there are a number of organizations that were basically writing the renewal checks so that people could do it, and that's still going on today. General recommendations are to still check and see if there's any other form of immigration status, immigration relief that you might be eligible for. We still think that as a group, DACA recipients are not going to be put into removal proceedings as a large group. The immigration courts are incredibly overburdened right now. We have judges scheduling hearings for 2021 right now. Imagining 800,000 DACA recipients being put into removal proceedings is almost impossible to imagine. There's already a backlog. I think it's over 600,000 cases. So there's no way that the administration would really even process this administratively, and that hasn't been the concern as much as individual DACA recipients being placed in removal proceedings due to contact with immigration if they have some prior deportation order, they're stopped by the police, have criminal history, or caught up in these kind of collateral raids where ICE is going in and kind of interviewing people or talking to people. So to talk very briefly about other forms of status that people might be eligible for, other ways of getting status that we think of. We always think of family visa petitions, asylum, but also U and T visas. So those are crime victim visas, basically, as well as, and I think this is important for this audience, special immigrant juvenile status. So that's for people who are abused, abandoned, or neglected by one or both of their parents who are under age 21. So for family visa petitions, and I understand some of these slides are going to be available later, so I'm just going to mention it briefly. My one point on this is that I think a lot of people think, oh, if I'm married to a U.S. citizen, then things are fine. And Bengali's case really illustrates that that does not end the conversation at all. There are a lot of potential bars, depending on your past immigration history. And so, being here without status, prior removals, entering unlawfully, can all be problematic. But generally the rule is that immediate relatives, so spouses, children under 21, parents of U.S. citizens are immediate relatives, and if you're not falling under these traps, then they're generally eligible to apply for lawful permanent resident status. It's more complicated for the more attenuated relationships, brothers, sisters, adult children. For asylum, I think the point for asylum that I want to make is that it's broader than just fleeing political persecution. So a lot of people hear asylum and they think, oh, there's some political conflict that I'm leaving. And really it can cover a wide variety of situations. So for example, we see domestic violence-based asylum cases being successful. So that is people fleeing incidents of domestic violence in their country, being unable to get the assistance of authorities, or if their family is in particular harm or targeted, if they feel fear of persecution because of their family. But the general rule is that you have to have a well-founded fear of persecution on account of your race, religion, nationality, political opinion, or membership in some social group. So asylum also ends up being very technical. You'd think that fleeing Syria, fleeing a war-torn situation would be enough. No, you have to link it to a threat of more individualized targeting based on one of those categories. Yes?
When you say social group, does that include family?
Yeah, so social group is where the litigation and the fights are about. So sexual orientation is thought of as social group. Family is thought of as social group. Gender-based claims, women fleeing domestic violence, for example, in their countries. Certain landowners, people targeted because they're landowners in the country, could fall under that as well. The U visa is also something that I think more and more people have heard about, but basically a U visa is kind of like a crime victim visa. So people who have been victims of certain crimes, we usually see domestic violence, violent crimes, robberies are the more common ones. And if they've been helpful to the authorities, that is they've gone to the police, there's a police report because they called the police and complained about it. If those authorities will certify that you had information, were helpful in this offense, then you can apply for a U visa. That gives you non-immigrant status in the U.S. For up to 4 years and allows you to apply for residency and then ultimately citizenship. So it's a path to citizenship. If you're under 21, the crime could be to your parent, and you could be included as a dependent or a derivative on your parent's application. So the takeaway there, if you've ever been a victim of a crime, complained to the police, worthwhile talking to an attorney to see if maybe you could benefit from a U visa. Also, there are protections for people who are, if they have an abusive U.S. citizen or lawful permanent resident spouse or parent who did not file for status for the person. Then you can file that petition on your own. It's called a self-petition. And then I believe the final point I want to talk about is the T visa, and this is what I mentioned in Bengali's context, which is people who've been trafficked, and there's an element of fraud, coercion, or force, unless you're under 18. Now, not just sexual trafficking, that's what you usually, I think the common conception is. And it's not necessarily that somebody was brought specifically to the US. Really the point is that the trafficking happened in the US. So the examples that I've seen have included labor issues, labor conditions, pretty severe ones. People, one that stands out to me is somebody who's brought over to work in their families, espresso stand. That's the most Northwest version of trafficking that you can imagine maybe. Also childcare. Not uncommon to see family members brought over to provide childcare, not paid, threatened that if they don't do that, they're going to be deported, etc. And that is also potentially a path to residency and citizenship. And I forgot, of course, the last one, the special immigrant juvenile expansion that happened in Washington state. So for people under 18, this provision existed before, but now it's been expanded to somebody under 21 for people who are in Washington state, residents in Washington state. So if you're under 21 and either you've been declared dependent by a juvenile court in the US, or you can get a vulnerable youth guardianship for people between 18 and 21. So that normally means that you're living with a guardian. So it could be whoever you happen to be living with, who's an adult, is technically going to be your guardian. And reunification with one or both of the parents is not viable because of abuse, abandonment, or neglect. So we often see one parent abandon the family when they were young. That could be the grounds. And it's in the best interest of the minor or of the youth not to be returned to the country. Then you can potentially apply for this form of relief. It's also a path to it's an immediate path to residency and then ultimately to U.S. citizenship. However, you can't petition for your parents if you get this. This is another one where it's important to talk to an attorney right away about it because it is time limited. If you hit 21, you're no longer eligible to apply. And the Northwest Immigrant Rights Project, as well as KIND, Kids in Need of Defense, works on these cases locally. I do have a resource list that I put on the table over there, and I just mentioned, I know I've said NERP a few times. It happens to be kind of the largest immigration legal services organization in Washington, so they tend to have the most capacity, although like every legal service organization, they're overburdened. And then there's a number of different organizations which I think do a really good job of posting updates about what's going on, and I included those websites both on some handouts there as well as up here. So with that, I'll close, and I left a little bit of time for questions.
Thanks. Recently in the news, I've heard of some permanent residents also being picked up for past minor offenses, and I'm wondering if things have changed in terms of the current administration with permanent residents.
It's hard to say if things have really, yes, there has been change. Maybe there are 2 points. Old criminal convictions from many years ago can still render you to be deportable, right? And so at that point, if ICE comes across you in one way or another, doing database checks, whatever they might be doing, they can send you a notice to appear for immigration court, or they can pick you up and detain you. Detention space drives detention. So if you have beds, the more beds you have, the more people are going to be detained. The fewer beds you have, the more people are just going to be told to show up at court. And that's simply the reality of detention space. So that hasn't changed. That's kind of been the same. What I think you've seen a real change, and from a kind of scholarly perspective, this is really interesting. ICE has historically, individual ICE offices, and I'd even say ICE officers, there's kind of a culture. And it'll vary in different parts of the country. Some offices are very hostile, some not so much. So you have a working relationship with, or you don't. And the Obama administration really tried to say, listen, we want to treat everybody kind of the same. We want to have priorities. We don't want people in Atlanta, Georgia, for ICE to be arresting everybody who they find there. Whereas in Seattle, they're just sending them notice to appears, or they're not even going after the case because the person doesn't have any criminal convictions. So the Obama administration really from the top down tried to enforce priorities. And so they had a list of priorities, and it really ordered ICE officers, if you run into somebody and it's a person who you find out is undocumented, but they don't have any criminal history, maybe they have kids in the States, you're not going to put them in removal proceedings. We are not going to prioritize that person. And I think for ICE, that really rubbed a lot of individual ICE officers the wrong way. It's like, well, no, if we come across somebody and we know that they're undocumented, we're going to put them in removal proceedings. That's our job. You're telling us we can't even do our job, right? But it kind of addressed this issue of arbitrariness, which was, hey, we're going to go out as ICE, we're going to look for somebody. Oftentimes, they're in an apartment building looking for a particular person, but they just start asking, well, how about you? Do you have status? How about you? Do you have status? And so you have people brought in a really arbitrary sense. And the question was, is that really the policy priority? So now I think what's really happened is everybody's a priority. So it means you're going to get a lot more of these cases which seem very sympathetic and seem like, well, why are we caring about this person? Why is this person a priority? And the answer is, well, everyone is now. And it's really a pushback against this trying to control the agencies and define who has that discretion. It's been really interesting to see the change from, I'd say, before the Obama administration and some of the cultural changes, which I didn't expect, to now it kind of turning again. So I hope that answered the question.
Hi, I have a question about confidentiality of records. So if we have a student who either has DACA status or SB 1079 status, and they are seeking state financial aid, we need them to file the WASFA, the Washington State Application for Financial Aid. Should we be in any way cautious about having somebody do that?
I'm afraid that's a question I really can't answer. I'd just say you'd want to be talking to your school administrators about the best, you probably have, but about the best policy to follow there.
Thank you very much. I'd like to follow up on the question you got earlier about permanent residence. Since there is this change in prioritization, what advice do you have for people who are not U.S. citizens in all visa categories or permanent residents about their behavior and ways that if they are having a contact with law enforcement or if they're if they happen to be pulled into secondary inspection in the airport or up in Blaine, what advice do you have for those people?
Yeah. It's hard, and it's hard. I'd back up and say first, immigration lawyers always tell people, get citizenship. Because until you're a citizen, really, you don't have the protections that you'd like. And things happen too, right? So there are a lot of, I tend to think it's easy to violate the law in the U.S. There are lots of different ways in which that can happen, even if you don't intend to. And it depends a lot on enforcement. So that's what the message we first always say. The second point, definitely there are Know Your Rights presentations. I actually eliminated those slides just because of time concerns. But there are good Know Your Rights materials. I don't have the link to it now, but actually on YouTube, people have put up some model, like how to interact with immigration enforcement and modeled it as well. The general advice that people give, secondary is one thing. Let's take it outside of secondary. Secondary inspection is when you come into the border, like you're driving through the Canada border, you're coming into the airport, and they say, oh, we're going to pull you aside and talk to you. And your rights are really minimal there. And so you don't have a lot of options. Getting a lawyer is nearly impossible as well. And so that's really a whole separate situation. The more everyday contact of immigration walks up to you and says, can I see an ID? What's your status? The general advice that we're giving people, I think, is you have a right to remain silent. I didn't bring any, unfortunately, there are Know Your Rights kind of cards, which the ACLU makes. Northwest Immigrant Rights Project also has them, which kind of give them and say, I'm exercising my right to contact an attorney, I'm not answering any questions, I want to call an attorney, handing that card to them. Same with if immigration comes to your house and says, you open up, we have a warrant, slide the warrant under the door. Is it signed by a judge? If it's not signed by an actual judge as opposed to an ICE officer, then you don't have to open the door. Now, all of that's very easy to say. It's very easy for me to say, oh yeah, if the police come up to you, you can say, I'm not going to answer your question. Yeah, I don't know if I could really do that if I was pulled over by an officer and said, no, I'm not going to answer your question, right? So, but that said, I have seen people do that and say, I'm not signing anything until I talk to a lawyer. Most of the time, what it means is that you're preserving a legal argument later. So when immigration then ignores the fact that you said, no, I'm not opening the door, and they kick it down and arrest you, you get to challenge whether or not that arrest was lawful after the fact. Same with questioning about your identity, et cetera. You may say, I'm not going to answer questions. Well, maybe they put you under arrest and they check your ID, et cetera. They run your name through some databases, they call ICE, and they say, oh, we have some information that indicates we think you're not here lawfully. Then maybe you're able to challenge that arrest after the fact. So that's not great advice, but there are some resources on it. I know there are Know Your Rights materials on the NERP website as well, but unfortunately, I think it's hard to do. Role-playing is good, but even then it's about kind of protecting your rights after the fact. I guess now, on a personal level, going through the airports, not to be overly suspicious, but on our cell phones, right, we have everything. I have a lot of confidential client communications on my cell phone, right? We do litigation against the government. I have emails about that on my cell phone, and I don't take my cell phone through the airport now. I take a different phone. So maybe not taking your cell phone, having a clean cell phone that you take back and forth with you if you don't want it to be searched. Even though in the Ninth Circuit, really, they shouldn't be able to search your cell phone coming in and out. Would I, at the border, say, no, keep me here for 5 hours? I'm going to wait you out. I don't know if I would really do that or not.
Chris, we have a question here in writing, and this is really a question for us organizers, so I'm going to take this one, and then we're going to turn the mic back to you. Somebody asked the question, they noticed that there's somebody running around taking photographs, and we're recording this event, and they're worried about people here that may not want to be noticed, don't want a picture taken. And yeah, we do that, we make a record of this, but I want to assure you folks that what will show up on our website is a picture of the presentation and the picture of the speaker, but pictures that were taken of the audience, there won't be any faces. We won't, if there's any faces apparent, we just won't put them on the website. So I hope that puts your mind at ease, and I hope you now go back to writing down your questions. And I'll turn it back over to you, Chris. Are there any questions there?
Hi, I was just wondering, because I've been to a few of these kinds of presentations, and I wonder in terms of networking and getting the word out to those most impacted by it, do you have any idea how successful that is being, or are there things that we could do to try to make sure that once we get educated about this, that we're able to share this and get this out to families? And I mean, our students, I think we have some ways to communicate, but yeah, is there some organizing going on around, I don't know, knocking on doors or passing out stuff, or help me, what's going on?
Well, I think there are a lot of efforts. I'm not sure how coordinated all the efforts are, but I guess I would say since the beginning of this administration, a lot of community-based groups have reached out to individual lawyers, to the American Immigration Lawyers Association, to the Northwest Immigrant Rights Project, to get presentations, information. And so I've seen a real community-based focus on getting information to people who are concerned about it. And I think that the community of immigration lawyers has really tried to step up to meet that need when asked, although it's certainly challenging just because the need is so great. The city of Seattle, too, I'm more familiar with what the city of Seattle is doing, but definitely has been reaching out, publicizing, organizing individual events. On February 3rd, there is a huge it's both a citizenship as well as general immigration legal question workshop run through the city as well. I do not know the website to register for that or the information about it from the outside, but I'm sure if you just Google City of Seattle February 3rd immigration, it will show up. So I think the city has definitely been at the forefront there. Different universities and community college, Highline Community College, I know, had a couple big events, and so I've seen that, as well as just organizations, from One America to NERP to others, trying to get word out and get that information out. But it's hard to gauge exactly, if the need's being met or not. But I think there's been a huge amount of interest and awareness and fear, and that's really driven the request for information, at least.
Time for one more question.
So it seems to me that there are certain things that help these private detention centers make more money. For example, the fact that their judges aren't available quickly, the fact that if they have empty beds, they try to fill them, or if they're available for people to be filled rather than just, it's okay to have empty beds, right? Is there anything we can do to protest that? I mean, obviously Obama made some efforts to say that that was maybe not the best, most efficient use of federal money. Do you know of any current actions about that part?
Yeah. There's a group called the Northwest Detention Center Resistance. They're on Facebook, and they're very active in a number of different ways. I think they've challenged some of the permitting for the detention center. It's on a Superfund site. There's some interesting questions about whether or not they have the requisite land use permits, and if there are any safety issues there. And GEO as well is doing a lot of lobbying and trying to work within just Tacoma local government to make their position stronger. So there are actually community efforts that I know they're linked into to be able to fight that, actually. So there has been a really impressive core of people, both organizing, and then also I've been really moved just to see the support. So they're there at the detention center on weekends, giving families coffee, things to drink, trying to cheer people up on cold days. There's a group called Aid Northwest, which has an RV that's outside the detention center. So it used to be, if you were in the detention center, you were released, you won your case, 4 or 5 o'clock, they open the doors, and there you go. You're outside in the tide flats in Tacoma. And now sometimes the ICE officers would call a cab or help arrange to get you to like the Amtrak station or the bus station, right, if you didn't have anybody. But in the past I've picked up clients because they didn't have anybody who could pick them up. And so you see people just out there with a big trash bag outside the road. And the Aid Northwest has an RV. They help people get money wired to them, get them to the bus stops, get them to Amtrak, get them to the next place where they're going to go. They have clothes, some food. They'll help them with some of the immigration paperwork after winning their case. And so they also do a lot of really great work. So they have a website, so that's one organization to look at too.
Okay. How about joining me in giving Christopher another round of applause for being with us today and sharing this information? Thank you very much.